to order. Madam Clerk, would you please take a roll call of the CCP Executive Committee?
Yes, I will take roll call. Thank you. Chief Fruchnick.
Here.
Member Rocio Vega.
Held telephonically pursuant to Governor's Executive Order N2920, issued on March 17th, 2020. The order allows governing bodies of the local agencies to hold their meetings electronically, provided that members of the public can also observe and provide public comment. A few guidelines for our meeting to run efficiently. Other than CCP members, all lines will be muted and unmuted by the moderator. CCP members and staff, please state your name each time you're speaking. Members should not speak until the speaker has finished. We will have public comment after each agendized item. With that being said, the first item up is consider approval of the agenda. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to review it.
Chair Fruchnick, I have some comments on that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm very troubled with the way item 5 is written and phrased. Today we're going to be discussing a CCP budget item. Since the inception of the CCP, the Executive Committee has always voted on budget issues. I've reviewed agendas from numerous past meetings, and items regarding the budget are always phrased action item and to approve. And I'm going to share a couple examples. November 18th, approve item, approve annual funding of $54,000. August 13th, approve the updated fiscal 2018-19 budget. February 26, 2018, approve funding for a new CAO CCP analyst. May 8, 2017, approve Community Corrections Partnership recommended budget for fiscal year 2017-18. June 13, 2016, approve fiscal year 2016-17 personnel request with the budget report. May 9, 2016, approve fiscal year 2016-17 probation funding request. December 14, 2015, review funding and request approval of budget. September 14, 2015, restore police department MOU funding, action. September 15, 2014, approve funding recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. September 8, 2014, review and approve budget planning recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. April 14, 2014, approve recommendation to begin MOU agreement for GED services. And March 5, 2012, approve CC treatment work group's recommendation for allocation of $170,000. And I'm not sure why we're all of a sudden seeing this change. And I don't think the CCP members agreed on that. There was some discussion of the February 2019 meeting where we decided to meet quarterly rather than monthly, but there was no discussion of any agreement about taking away the statutorily required CCP vote on the budget. That was never discussed. This is codified in Penal Code section 1230.1b. The CCP votes, and then it goes to the Board of Supervisors, and if the Board of Supervisors rejects with a supermajority, then the budget goes back to the CCP. The CCP has always voted on budget for many, many years at numerous meetings. The BSCC, in a response to an inquiry about this issue, said the CCP shall vote on budgets. So I'm not implying that the DA doesn't support today's budget proposals, but really this is a process issue here. I realize that the CAO's office and County Council disagrees with our position and maybe others on the Executive Committee. But as written, the DA cannot vote and will not vote to approve this agenda. What I'd ask for, and what I make a motion for, is the agenda to be modified to read, approve fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. I actually asked for this and never got a response. Thank you.
So, Jonathan, this is Phil Pogletich, and with Dan's permission, I'll briefly address the remarks you just made. That good with you, Dan? I'll assume so. So briefly, Dan and I talked about whether agenda item 5, as it's currently phrased, would allow the CCP to consider a motion and vote upon a motion to recommend a 2021 budget to the Board of Supervisors. I told him, unequivocally in my mind, this allows the CCP to make and approve such a motion. The phrase "consider a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors" contemplates action by the CCP. I don't believe any change in wording is necessary to allow for a CCP vote regarding the budget. And as you acknowledged, you and I have gone back and forth regarding the significance of any CCP vote on the budget. You mentioned a statutory provision a moment ago, Penal Code Section 1230.1b. That describes the role of the CCP Executive Committee with regard to a plan. This is the plan that was included for as part of AB 109 in 2011, and it relates to the use of realignment funding. So that's a plan. It doesn't use the word budget. The word budget doesn't appear in that statute anywhere. And it's important to understand that even with regard to that plan, the action of the Executive Committee is a recommendation to the board. So it's very much in alignment with the language on the agenda. I think the agenda as it's currently drafted and in front of you is appropriate for a recommendation to the board on the budget. And I'll close with that.
So I have a motion on the table. I think this is really pro forma because I think it's not going to matter ultimately whether we approve the agenda or not. And I think maybe the proposed budget will be approved by this executive committee, but it's like I said, it's a matter of process here. I read probably 10 or 15 past agenda where it was written differently, and I don't understand why it's written this way on this occasion. So the DA is not going to vote to approve this agenda. It may not even matter, but I'd like to make a motion to amend it as stated.
And I would second that. I share the same concerns as Mr. Raven. That was John Miller, by the way, for the record.
And so for the sake of clarity, the specific change to the agenda that you're proposing, Jonathan, is to modify item 5 to read how?
Approve fiscal year 2020-21 budget action item.
In full. I think that's permissible because it's the same thing the agenda already provides for. I mean, ordinarily under the Brown Act, we couldn't change an agenda to include a new item. But since you're simply rephrasing an existing item, that would be a permissible motion under the Brown Act, I believe.
Yeah, that was my analysis too, Phil, is that it doesn't change anything substantively. And according to you, my proposal is really no different than what's written. But that being said, as a matter of process, it's important to the DA's office, and I guess Chief Miller also.
The sheriff concurs with that also.
So Dan, I don't know how if your feed is working okay, but I think at this point, you can entertain further discussion if there is any, or ask for Julie to take a roll call vote. And let's see, so this is a full CCP agenda. I'm trying to figure out what the universe of voting people would be on this particular change to the agenda.
Yeah, Phil, just to clarify, the agenda was written so that either the CCP or the CCP Executive Committee could take a vote on a budget recommendation depending on which wanted to do so. It was meant to be as expansive as possible. I'm not clear whether Jonathan is still allowing for the CCP, full CCP to take a vote if they want, or whether his would constrain to just the CCP Executive Committee.
So that's a good question because we all know that the executive committee votes on budget, not the full committee. And
Well, just to clarify on that, the full CCP could certainly vote and make a recommendation on the budget. There's nothing that prohibits them from doing that. That's why the agenda was worded this way. I understand the difference of opinion in terms of the CCP executive committee and your perception of what their role may be. But regardless, the way the budget agenda is written right now, if the full CCP wanted to provide an advisory recommendation, they could.
okay, so now we're talking about the motion on the table. And I'm not, honestly, I'm not exactly sure. It's more maybe a question for Phil about who would vote on this motion. I'm not really sure. I don't really mind either way.
Well, it's a CCP agenda, although I think our roll call initially was confined to the executive committee. I think the best approach would be to have the full CCP vote. We may want to go back and take a roll call of the remaining members. I know this whole CCP versus CCP executive committee thing is a little confusing, in part because the membership is almost entirely the same. But I would recommend we have the full CCP vote on that.
Okay, I must apologize. My Zoom keeps freezing. Hopefully I have it fixed at this point. So I may have to ask for some people to repeat what they said. I apologize. But what it sounds like is we're going to do a roll call of the entire CCP, not just the executive committee, to vote on this specific agenda item, which Jonathan has moved and seconded by Chief Miller. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I believe that's correct, Dan. I'll look to Jonathan for agreement with that.
That's fine.
Okay. With that, Madam Clerk, can you first, I guess we need to do a full roll call of the CCP to see who's exactly here, and then we'll do a roll call vote on Jonathan's motion.
Okay, I will go ahead and do a full roll call vote. So I will start with Chief Probation Officer Dan Fruchnick,
Present.
Member Sean Landry, or Rocio Vega.
Yes, Rocio Vega here on behalf of Sean Landry for the court.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, just to clarify, you said you're doing a full roll call vote. Right now, you're just going through the roll call again, right? Not taking votes, but just seeing.
Correct. I'm just doing
Okay.
roll call only.
Understood. Okay.
Thank you. Now Supervisor Provenza. And District Attorney Representative Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
Public Defender Member Olson,
Here.
and Member Dale Johnson,
Here.
Member John Miller,
Present.
Member Karen Larson,
Present.
Member Ian Evans,
I think that that would be two members from HHSA. So
okay, thank you.
Votes.
No,
It's-
Bill may want to clarify on that.
Yeah, under the CCP statute, the full CCP does include the head of alcohol and substance abuse programs if that person is distinct from the HHSA director and holds that seat because the HHSA director, I believe there's some language in the statute about qualifications. So Ian is properly a member of the CCP.
Actually, that statute and those members now all under Health and Human Services was anticipated that each of those departments would be separate departments in the county. So that's why I think we've had one member, Karen and her alternates as members of the CCP since its inception. But that's just my interpretation of the statute and why they listed a number of members that are all under Health and Human Services.
Yeah, and I should clarify, actually, I misspoke. It's not the statute, it's the county code provision that creates the Health and Human Services Agency and defines the duties of the director of the Health and Human Services Agency. It actually carves out a couple of positions from that. One is alcohol and substance abuse. And so that is a separately held position under the county code as part of the consolidation of HHSA, and we've concluded Ian is properly a member of the CCP for that reason.
Okay.
Okay, we'll continue with Office of Education member Garth Lewis.
Here.
Thank you. And we have Community-Based Organization Representative Mark Nigel.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And Victim Representative Laura Valdez.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, roll call is complete.
Thank you. Just for clarification, oh, sorry.
I was going to say,
Phil-
now Julie gets to go through that again for the vote.
Correct. And I was going to ask Phil or Jonathan.
Now's the time when Dan needs a vice chair.
Could the motion, just so we're all.
He's cutting out, right?
Yeah.
He's
I'm not
cutting
hearing
out.
you, Dan. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, how about now?
Yeah.
I was just asking if Phil or Jonathan could restate the motion before we vote.
The motion is that item 5 should read action item : approve fiscal year 2020-21 budget.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take the vote. Member Dan Fruchnick,
Yes.
member Rosia Vega.
The court abstains from voting.
Thank you. Member Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
member Tracy Olson,
No.
member Sheriff or Under Sheriff Dale Johnson,
Yes.
member John Miller,
Yes.
member Karen Larson,
Yes.
member Garth Lewis,
Abstain.
Love you.
okay, member Mark Nigel,
Abstain.
and member Laura Valdez.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Six yeses, 1 no, and 2 abstains.
Thank you. All right, next up is an opportunity for public comment. At this point in the meeting, the Community Corrections Partnership accepts comments from the public on items that are not on our agenda. State law limits our ability to respond to comments, and for that reason, we may respond to you briefly or not at all. For public comment, if you are joining by PC, you will see a button to raise your hand. If you are joining *9 to raise your hand, either by name they entered or the phone number they are calling from. Once I call your name, the clerk will unmute the line to allow your comments. Speakers are requested, but not required, to state their name and city of residence for the record and limit their comments to 3 minutes. Once the speaker is done, you will be muted and I will call the next speaker. With that repeated, do we have any public comment?
I don't have any hands raised, Chair.
Give me just 1 second. I'm going to try to switch something up with my computer real quick to help with the it keeps freezing up on me. I apologize. 1 second. I don't know if that's going to work in office.
I believe Dan is changing computers. We'll give him a minute.
Okay, I'm switching computers real quick. So I switched offices. Hopefully everybody can see me, although it looks like I need to sit down.
It's not going to stay. The video won't work.
So go to here.
No, it won't work at all.
So it appears as though video may not work for me, which I apologize for the technical difficulties. Can someone nod their head or say yes that they can hear me?
I can hear you well, Dan.
Okay, perfect. Again, I apologize about that. So we were at public comment. There were no hands raised. Next, we'll move to member announcements. Are there any member announcements? Looking like there is not. Next, we'll move over to agenda item 5. And unfortunately, I left my notes in the other office. Phil, we voted on the new motion. Can you read it off to me one more time, please?
Well, actually, I've been relying on Jonathan, as I believe he had it written down. But
Jonathan, can
the
you repeat it
substance.
for me?
Want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Action item : approve fiscal year 2020-21 budget.
Perfect. With this, I'll turn it over to Mr. Blacklock.
Do you have the ability to share screen?
That was taken away with the name change. Lupita, can you give the co-host ability back? Okay.
So up on the screen is the packet that you had in your packets or the spreadsheet that you had in your packets as well. And it's going to look a little different than the one we reviewed in early August, partly because we received feedback during that meeting that informed this most current version. And then Dan and I have been working to continue to refine it as well. So there's two options that are primarily displayed here. It's the same format as last time, where in column E, you see what is already approved basically in the recommended budget. And then columns G, H, and I reflect the model that we talked about at the previous CCP meeting with a couple of notable changes. One is that this now includes a reduction for the Public Defender's Office as well. And then secondly, I think if you were to scroll down to the additional additions as a real strategic plan, I guess in this version, you can see that there's one item labeled TBD at the bottom, and that was because at the time in August, that 30,000 was originally earmarked for a program that we subsequently found is already funded. And so that goes to 0, as you can see, as you go over to the peach columns, but it's still in that model 1. If you can scroll back up. So again, the blue columns are for the most part what we saw in August, with the exception of the additional reduction for the public defenders. But the model 2, which is columns J, K, and L, are the newest, is the new scenario for which we're seeking CCP feedback. And what's notably different about this is that it just applies an across the board straight 8% cut, with the exception of the CEO's office. But for the remaining departments, a straight 8% cut. To derive sufficient funding to do two things. One is to fund those additional activities to align better with the CCP strategic plan. And then secondly, to try and maintain some fund balance as we roll into the next fiscal year. And if you scroll down again, sorry to keep doing this, but if you scroll down, you can see the net revenue, or row 41, shows that in the first scenario, expenditures exceed revenues by about 1.1 million. And in the second scenario, expenditures exceed revenues by about 1.2 million. That difference is made up in two ways. One is the realignment backfill, which is, as we know, this year only. And then secondly, the use of fund balance. And so you can see what the ending fund balance is projected to be there, 612 in the first one and 503 in the next one. And that's important because assuming the same budget were to go forward next year, there's this $1.2 million gap. Some fund balance would be needed to balance it. Whether that fund balance will be that amount or something higher, we won't know obviously until next year. But I point that out as why it's important to try to maintain some fund balance as we go forward. So these two scenarios are presented for CCP, or the CCP Executive Committee, to provide feedback. We're going to continue to hopefully get them refined and take to the Board of Supervisors on the 29th as part of the adopted budget hearing to modify what's in the recommended budget to conform with whatever, well, we know we need to make changes in terms of revenue reductions, but this would also, both of these would align better with the CCP plan. So I'll stop there. There may very well be questions for Dan or me, or you may want to have dialogue around it.
Absolutely. With that, I'll turn it over to CCP discussion and comments and questions.
I'll make a comment. I do appreciate this, a much more equitable approach towards it, which I mentioned at the last meeting. We'll still express a concern in regards to implementing a new program when, like I said, we are running this ultimately deficit. But I understand that the new program might be very beneficial. And that's my only comments.
Yeah, the thought process for that was to, again, start taking steps to align the budget more with the strategic plan. We voted on the strategic plan, and we have a bunch of action items, tasks that we are trying to do. And so the thought process behind that was just to start taking a step in that direction.
I do have a couple comments.
Yes, Tracy.
When we all met before COVID, because it was an in-person meeting, I think it was actually Dale Johnson that brought this up, and we all agreed that we should be keeping a reserve. And we had agreed at the time that we would be keeping a $400,000 reserve for contingencies. If we adopt either of these two budgets, our fund balance is going to be reduced to 500, and we're going to have a net deficit next year of $1.2 million. So there's no way we can keep a reserve if we follow either of these two tracks. And we've done this for so many years where we're operating where we're expending more than we're bringing in, and we always kick the can down the road. And I don't know why we don't do it differently this year. We're supposed to, our revenues are 7.8 million and our expenditures are almost 9 million, and we're asked to approve that. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I would favor dipping into our fund balance to pay for one-time things. Like if we want to launch these programs as pilots and keep some data and see how they do, fine, let's dip into it for that. Let's make sure we keep a reserve. But fundamentally, what we're paying for ongoing costs, I think we need to address. And I think we need to address it this year, not next year. Either of these two budgets put us significantly in the hole going forward.
Thank you for those comments. Others?
Hi, Dan, Under Sheriff Johnson. I do have
Yes,
some
Under
comments.
Sheriff, go ahead.
Appreciate everybody getting together, but the Sheriff's Office would like to object on how these formulas were brought forward. Just want to put that on record that we're not in agreement with that, and I'll leave it at that.
This is Karen. I'm just going to go back to the kind of budget piece more than the philosophical piece. I have the largest county budget in the county, and we're all going through extremely difficult times. To close 1920, I had to spend all of the reserves we had built up, which was several $1 million. So I do understand the value of having a fund balance or reserves to rely on. I don't believe that as stewards of the public dollar, it's responsible for us to spend the entirety and overspend what we are allocated within this fund. And while those positions within departments that are being cut may very well be critical to the success of the county, I can't agree that every one of them should be funded by AB 109, because the spirit of AB 109 is to transform our system and provide rehabilitative services to our offenders in hopes of having better outcomes. And I appreciate that treatment wasn't cut in either of these scenarios, because honestly, we provide more than half of the match for the treatment funds, so we are covering those costs. But I couldn't support a budget that also cuts social workers in the public defender's office.
Thank you. Others?
This is
Hearing. Oh, go ahead.
Jonathan
Yes.
Raven. I was wondering what Chair Fruitnick and Mr. Blacklock, what was the thought process in these two possible budgets, and what are your feelings, especially Mr. Blacklock, on what has been discussed by Ms. Olson and Ms. Larson?
Well, the overall thinking was to craft a budget that did a couple of things. One, aligned with the changes in AB 109 revenue. So we had to decrease the amount of revenue as a result of the latest state projections. So that was going to require some decreases right there, although it's roughly pretty close to the realignment backfill, but that realignment backfill is one time. Secondly, we know that the board of supervisors continually asks, what effort have we made to align with the CCP plan? And so we wanted to be intentional about this year, and went through the plan looking for areas that were gaps. And those are the areas listed under in rows 35 through 38, 39. So those were the driving forces, to align with actual revenue and then to align it with the CCP approved plan. I'm a little less worried about the fund balance piece of it, because this assumes that we will fully expend each and every one of those line items. We've not historically done that. If we were to look at historical trends, that 503 is likely to be something higher than what it is there. But that's right at this point would be nothing better than a guess. But we know that we've never fully expended each of those lines. So I'm a little more comfortable with the concept of approving the budget as you see it, with a reduced that reduces the fund balance, provided we retain a substantive fund balance, which I would argue both of these do. Now, if the recession continues and we go into 21, 22, and revenues, or we see the same phenomenon of revenues potentially decreasing, well, then that'll be a game changer and things will need to change. But I'm hopeful that that won't be the case, and we'll begin to see revenues either be stable or start to climb going into next year. So that's a long-winded, perhaps, answer to your question, which is to say that we had to adjust for actual numbers. We wanted to align with the CCP approved plan, and we wanted to bring a couple scenarios forward for you to consider.
And this is Jonathan Raven again. No, that wasn't too long, actually. Is it fair to say that with respect to forecast for next year, you're cautiously optimistic that things will be okay with respect to our budget? And is that what you were saying?
I don't know if I'd use the word optimistic. I would be happy with stable in terms of what we see next year. This is the first year I remember that since 2011 that AB 109 revenues have declined due to a recessionary environment. And I would hope that we wouldn't see a second year of it, but that's going to be influenced by COVID for sure as we go forward. So I don't know if I'd use the word optimistic, but I feel comfortable with the budget that's before you.
And can you tell me, Mr. Blacklock, over the years, and you may not have this information on the tip of your fingers, but what percentage of the budget generally do we usually expend? Because you said usually we don't expend the full budget. Do you know? Do you have a percentage average?
I don't, but if you were to look at actual fund balance compared to projected fund balance, actual fund balance has always been higher than projected fund balance for each of those years, as I remember it. So but it can vary depending on vacant positions, for example. And that's a little hard to predict.
So it sounds like you're saying you're comfortable with Model 2.
Correct.
This is Tracy Olson. Okay, so under either model, you have a realignment backfill estimated of, or I guess to be used, you have a fund balance of either 600 or 500, depending on if we go with option 1 or 2. But then you have an estimated net revenue in the red. So are you saying that, for instance, under option 2, you expect to have $750,000 in additional savings to cover that expected revenue loss? Or are we just going to try to figure out what cuts we're making next year?
No, not necessarily. What could happen though is that the ending fund balance could be higher than the 503,000, and revenue could go up next year. So we won't know that until we get further into the year. But those two things might make it to where it's easier to balance next year than it would appear to be right now.
Is this how we do the actual budget for the county?
Correct. It's heavily reliant on fund balance for balancing each year. And revenues do not match expenditures for the same reason, which is that we're running an 11% vacancy rate across the county right now. And a few of the bigger departments, we implement salary savings factors, but for many of the smaller departments, we don't. And so when it's as high as 11%, that means there's going to be more savings rolling into fund balance in a given year. But in 2012, it was closer to 5%, if I'm remembering correctly. So that vacancy factor can vary quite a bit. You don't want to count on it necessarily, but it's that gives me some comfort that scenario 2 is a prudent budget to adopt.
This is Tracy again. The other thing that I do appreciate that Dannon and Patrick, you've looked at adding new proposals that fit into our strategic plan. I understand why those are in there, and I'm fine with them. When we do straight percentage cuts to every department, though, we are again disregarding any analysis as to whether or not the programs we're funding are programs we want to continue to fund. As a group, we are abdicating that choice to the individual departments to say, here's your cut, you figure out what you're going to get rid of. And we know we have programs on here that A, we didn't initially allocate money towards, and B, may not be working as intended. And again, I think I feel like a broken record because I know for a fact I said this exact same thing at least last year, maybe even the year prior. We're not aligning our overall budget to the programs that are working. We're just saying, everyone take a cut.
No, it's definitely understand those comments, and obviously I think we moving forward, we need to look at different metrics and go more of that route. I just don't know if we're there right now. And Patrick, if you can add anything.
Well, the across the board cut was feedback that came from the last CCP meeting. So we brought that forward to the CCP after listening to the CCP to consider after listening to the CCP.
What will it take for us to get there? Like what Dannon said, because we need to start doing this now for next year. Otherwise, what's going to happen next year is we're going to all say, this is work that we haven't done and we need to do it. So I don't think this is the best budget we could come up with. I get that it is what it is right now and it's September, but I don't want to be in this position again next year. So I'd like to make a plan so we're not in this position next year.
Again, I appreciate the feedback, and I think, I'm hoping we've taken some of the beginning steps toward that with some of the projects we've done and attempting to align some of this with the strategic plan, but understand your comments for sure.
And this is Jonathan Raven, Chair. You had mentioned to me that you were going to be shifting our funding from the high tech to our program manager for neighborhood court, correct?
Could you scroll up on the spreadsheet? So I think you're speaking to row 14.
Yeah, when I'd spoken to the chair, he had said, because I had said at the last meeting, we have lots of expenditures that are aligned with the strategic plan that we're not receiving CCP money for, and it's general fund. And one of those is our program manager for neighborhood court, which has proven to be very effective. The victim witness is much of what she does is all based on AB 109 and realignment and consistent with the strategic plan. And she spends a lot of time at the DRC and classes on victimology for parolees and probationers. So that's definitely consistent. But when I was speaking to the chair, he had said he was going to shift that money. So it would be in line with the strategic plan because we certainly have expenditures that are from the general fund or funded by the general fund that are not funded by the CCP and are consistent with the strategic plan.
Yes, under scenario or model 2, if it was across the board reductions, then it would also include the funding shift from high tech to neighborhood court for 2021. On line 14.
This is Tracy again. I'm not going to argue over my $12,000 cut because 8% of hardly anything is hardly anything. But I don't know why all of us, every department, puts significant time, effort, and resources into things that align with the CCP strategic plan and AB 109 and don't get reimbursed for it. So that criteria is equally applicable to everybody. And I think that it's a little disingenuous to vote as a CCP to spend money on something and then later just shift it around because things have changed without CCP input. But like I said, I'm not gonna, my 8% or my 15% of $155,000 is not worth arguing about. But in general, I don't agree that we should, the high tech never got a CCP allocation, ever. Neighborhood court never got a CCP allocation. Nobody ever said that's where we wanted to spend the money. We spent it on something different and then it got shifted and now it's getting shifted again. And it's just it's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic and it's not something that CCP ever as a group agreed upon. That's an example. The $71,000 to high tech is an example of something that in my opinion should be cut in its entirety. It's not an AB 109 program, has nothing to do with AB 109, has to do with the investigation of cell phones to prosecute people on all range of cases. And it's supplemented by city law enforcement. But again, this is one of the reasons why just taking an 8% cut around to everybody without actually focusing on targeted allocations or where the money is being spent, I think is doing a disservice to CCP.
Thank you. Is there any other comments from CCP? I'll open it up to the public for comment and then I'll return it back for a comment by the CCP.
This is Karen. I'll just, one final comment from me. I don't think in good conscience I could support either of these budgets. Like I said in my opening, I can't support a budget that cuts social workers in the public defender's office when they are providing the exact services that AB 109 was intended to support and create. I agree with Tracy wholeheartedly that we have been having this discussion at the CCP for more than 3 years now. We have committed as a CCP to invest these funds in a way that is aligned with our strategic plan, and we continue to not do so because we don't want to cut the other departments within the county, which I don't want to do either. Like, I appreciate my partnerships with the district attorney's office and with the sheriff's department and with everybody that sits around this table. And I believe that all of the services you're providing are probably very valuable. I don't believe that they should be funded through AB 109. And so I don't think that in good conscience, I could support either of these budget proposals.
And I agree with Karen, 100%.
Thank you. And with that, I'll open it up to public comment. Lupita, is there any public comment?
Yes, we have Francesca Wright.
Go ahead, Ms. Wright.
Hello, CCP official members and unofficial members. I find this budget really hard to look at, having been spending my time as an unpaid volunteer, tuning into what the intentions of this group are, and I have been coming to your meetings for 3 years, and you're doing the same thing. It's not good enough. It's not consistent with the intention of the law. I looked at that high-tech thing, and if high-tech line item is already being funded through neighborhood court program, it should be stricken from the request. If you strike it from the request, then under Model 1, the DA's office is 100% funded, and under Model 2, they actually increase funding by nearly 9%. But the bigger question is, on what basis are you making these decisions? Looking at year-over-year changes is not looking at what your goals and objectives are and what your strategic plan has intended to do and measuring your results. It's frittering money away in the same old ways that are getting a 54% recidivism rate. It is not good enough. I would like to see the results have measures for what you're trying to attain in the strategic plan, and invest in what is working. Don't just pad your own budgets. It's most disappointing. I'm over.
Thank you, Lupita. Next public comment, please.
That was the only hand we had raised.
Okay, with that, I'll return it to the CCP members for further discussion or comment.
Yeah, it's Jonathan Raven. I just want to say the high tech actually does do a lot of AB 109 cases. It does all the high tech work for probation on AB 109 cases that it wouldn't normally do. But I do want to comment on the public defender's cuts. And I wholeheartedly agree with Ms. Larson and Ms. Olson that we don't want to cut social workers. They're very important. But I raised this issue last time. You know, I don't know what this administrative support is. And I don't know if that's in any way related to the strategic plan or AB 109. So I like Model 2, but I would have reduced administrative support in the full amount for the public defender and kept social worker fully funded, because I do believe that's an important and valuable position for the whole criminal justice system.
This is Tracy. Then why don't we just shift it to my other social worker? I have 3 social workers and they both do, and 2 work with adults. So let's just shift it to my other social worker, like you're shifting high tech to neighborhood court. Let's do that.
I mean, you can shift the money however you want. I mean, and you should, I agree that would be a good plan, that administrative support should be shifted to something more directly in line with the strategic plan, your other social worker. But that being said, like for the DA's office and everyone else, we still have these cuts out of somewhere, you know, in our budget from CCP. So I agree that with Mr. Blacklock that Model 2 seems like a good plan. We're all taking some of the cuts. And I mean, I certainly wouldn't have a problem if and it probably should, the funding should be shifted to your other social worker rather than for administrative support. That makes a lot of sense, Tracy.
If I can comment, I thought also part of the whole CFAC study was to try to evaluate our current programs and their effectiveness And I do agree with Tracy and Karen also in regards to these programs, need to align with our goal. I will disagree with you on the point that goal number 2 is to restore victims and the community and hold offenders accountable. So it's not just about all services to the offenders, it's also about services to the victims. All right, so I just wanted to make that point. If you remember about 2-3 years ago, you guys all gave presentations about how you spend your money. I thought that was a valuable exercise to reevaluate how you are spending the money that you are allocated and present that to the board when we go into the budget cycle. And I do agree with you, Tracy. It seems like we're always last minute arguing about this. And it's Groundhog Day all over again. So maybe a little bit better planning, more discussion earlier about our budget and again, how each individual department is spending that money. I'm blessed that in that way, that my very first year, all money was taken from law enforcement. So I don't have anything to present to you. But that also makes me kind of, as I've said many times before, no dog in the fight.
No, thank you. Is there any more comment?
Your picture's not up, Dan.
What's that?
Did you switch computers? Did you run away?
No, I'm at I had to switch computers earlier due to some technical issues with mine.
Got it.
Well, was on today for feedback, which definitely received feedback. Pat, I don't know if you have any closing words. If not, I'll ask for, go ahead.
Dan, I think Jonathan may have wanted to make a motion. He felt strongly about the need to vote earlier, so this would be an opportunity if the CCP wants to do so.
That's what I think the agenda calls for is a vote, up or down. I mean,
so is it a matter of making a motion to adopt this budget or recommend this budget to the board?
Correct. Somebody needs to make a motion on something.
I will make that motion to adopt the Model 2 as a recommendation of the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
I second that. Under Sheriff Johnson seconds that.
So motion from Chief Miller and a second from Under Sheriff Johnson to approve the budget as outlined in scenario or Model 2. We'll call a roll call vote.
Dan, can we clarify what the maker of the motion was? His motion assuming that the vote would be of the executive committee of the CCP?
That is a good question.
Do I need to specify that? I thought
that would be consistent with the way Jonathan expressed it at the start of the meeting, as if it is the executive committee that is voting on this particular motion.
Yeah, in accordance with Mr. Raven's, Jonathan's motion that I thought passed with the agenda.
And
I think Dan answered it. I think that both the maker of the motion, and I'm assuming under Sheriff Johnson agrees to that this would be, the motion was limited to the executive committee of the CCP. So roll call would be for the executive committee.
Okay, I apologize. We're still have a few technical issues with the meeting at the moment. So with that being said, let's do a roll call vote of the executive committee, please.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take a roll call vote of the executive committee. Chair Frickdick, how do you vote?
Given that I'm helping to craft the plan going to the board, I think it's best for me to abstain. I'll abstain on the vote.
Member Jonathan Raven?
yes.
Member Tracy Olson?
No.
Member John Miller?
Yes.
Member Dale Johnson?
Yes.
Member Karen Larson?
No.
Okay, so the vote is, we have 2 yeses, or excuse me, 3 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 abstain. So motion passes.
Just a clarification, I think we probably have 2 abstentions. The court also.
Oh, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, there's no more agenda items other than adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
We'll make that motion as well.
Can I get a second, please?
Second, Jonathan Raven.
Thank you. With that, I'll end the meeting. Thank you.